Awesome. Thanks, Erica. Hey, everyone. This is Steph Allen. I am the Associate Director of Enablement and Optimization at Valier. Also a Sitecore Strategy MVP from 2019. And I hopped along on Erica's presentation because I thought it might be helpful to give a little context for folks who are less technical but are interested in learning more about personalization with Sitecore and what you can do. So let's get into it. So a little personalization 101. For those of you who have a ton of experience with personalization, just hold on. Erica's part's after mine. But to get started, I thought this was an interesting description from Gartner. So personalization is a process that creates a relevant, individualized interaction between two parties designed to enhance the experience of the recipient, which is a real mouthful. I work with a lot of clients who are trying to get started on their path to personalization with Sitecore. And I think one thing that this description is really missing is how do you do this? Where does the information that you base this off of come from? So I broke it into these two pieces. So personalization delivers tailored experiences or communication. I think everybody gets that piece of it. I think it's the second part that people don't necessarily understand or really think about, which is that it's based on information a company has learned about an individual. So when a lot of our clients are getting started with personalization, they ask us, we want to personalize, this experience or this component. We want it to have this specific message. How do we get started? So I broke these down into two separate activities, each of these pieces here. The top piece really requires content strategy, experience design, and marketing communications. What is that personalized experience that you actually want to deliver? The second piece requires a cross-channel data strategy and an understanding of web analytics. And what that means is that we really need to understand the data points. What is the information that we want to personalize on so that we can then deliver this first piece, which is that personalized experience. So just to throw out some ideas, here are some data points that you can use to do personalization on. You've got GeoIP, location. I think this is a pretty common one. People say, well, I have somebody from Australia who is watching this webinar and I want a big banner that says welcome from Australia because the system knows that you're coming from Australia. Maybe it's a referring URL. We have a particular client who has a lot of traffic coming from a competitor's site. So maybe they want to change messaging or hide certain things based on the fact that it's a competitor. So here's just a number of things. You can take a look at this beautiful screen here. Member status, we at Valier work with a lot of associations. So personalizing on member status and delivering custom messages based on whether somebody is a new member, isn't yet a member, or maybe is about to become a lapsed member. We might have different messaging for those people. But where does all this data come from? Where does it live? How do we know that we have it or we don't? I think that's what can also be really challenging for a lot of our clients to know. Apologies if you hear a kitten chirping in the background. She's very excited to be part of this presentation. So personalization relies on user data. It's impossible to have a successful personalization program if you're not thinking or being thoughtful about the types of data that you are personalizing on. So I like to break it down into three types of data: explicit data, behavioral data, and attribute data. And I will walk through each one of these things. One area that we often get stuck on as strategists is understanding the technical complexity involved with gathering any of these types of data. So when we're designing these beautiful websites with beautiful personalized experiences, we might say, well, based on the member status, we want the experience to be different depending on which member status an individual is. But if we're not collecting that member status somewhere, then we can't personalize on it. And that member status can be, often requires a rather complex integration with a third-party AMS system or CRM systems. So anyway, I'll talk about all that stuff coming up. So explicit data is the first one. So explicit data I like to categorize as information that a user has willingly provided you. So if you think about what you use to log in, providing a name, your email address, you filled out a survey. So I'm telling you my preferences by filling out that survey. Transactional history, I've bought something in the past, and now you know that about me because I gave that to you. Any demographics information that I have provided to you would be considered explicit data, and any profile preferences as well. So contact me once a month, or I'm interested in learning more about coronavirus perhaps, and you can send me that information. This is data that I have given you with my permission, and there's no question about it that it's likely fact or truth. One thing, though, worth mentioning is that explicit data can sometimes become outdated. So perhaps I've moved in the last 6 months and I gave you my address before. Now my data is less reliable because it's out of date. So with explicit data, it's important to constantly engage with your users and make sure that you're getting the latest and freshest up-to-date information. Here on the right is an example of a dashboard that Valier designed recently for the National Association of Home Builders. And on it, we've got, welcome message, welcome Margaret Allen. We know that is her name because she has provided that to us as part of her membership. The membership also, we know that she's interested in particular courses or particular topics, and therefore we're delivering this to her on her custom dashboard. Explicit data in Sitecore. So what does it give you out of the box? Nothing. There's no explicit data available out of the box in Sitecore. Only if a user is logged in would there be some information available, but in order to personalize on that information, you'd have to set it up. So one thing that I like to recommend is you could leverage Sitecore Forms to link explicit data from a web survey into XDB, and then that data would be available. But all of it requires getting wired up in order to personalize on it. The next type of data is behavioral data. So this is implicit behavior-based assumptions that we can make about a user based on what they did. So everyone's favorite example is Netflix or perhaps Amazon. Because you looked at this thing or because you watched this particular documentary, you might be interested in these other documentaries. So this is a great type of personalization that it's making an assumption, whereas explicit data is we don't have to assume because a user gave us that information. So we use behavioral data to track topical interests. A lot of our clients deliver content-heavy sites, so they're talking about a lot of different topics, and our clients like to know which topics users seem to be interested based on their browsing behavior, so that they can then surface that content that is from that topic for them. Product area is another really easy one. The Amazon example, because you shopped for cat toys, you might be interested in cat leashes. And then additionally, content type, again, we do a lot of content heavy sites. So we have clients who do a lot of white papers, knowing that people like white papers, we want to be able to surface more white papers to them. Visit pathways is another big one. So just watching how your users are flowing through content. And then finally, tracking key conversions is another one. So if someone has downloaded a white paper, then perhaps the next step on the journey is to get them to sign up for an email newsletter. So by capturing these key conversions, we can make assumptions about these users that they're interested in a certain area, and we can then deliver them better, more tailored content to them. So behavioral data in Sitecore, there's a few different ways to get at this. One is just basic visit information. So in Sitecore, we can tell if it's their first visit, if it's their 10th visit, if it's their 500th visit. We can tell how recently they visited, how long they visited, and those are all data points that we can personalize on. A lot of our clients like to do personalization on first visit so that a message is received to a user the first time they come to the site, a welcome message or onboarding, or additionally the first time somebody logs into a site to let them know that maybe some things have changed and would they like a tour. Another way you can get behavioral data in Sitecore is through behavioral profiling. And this is, I think, one of the features that makes Sitecore really unique and special is that it has a way of allowing you to understand the behavioral patterns of people so that you can then glean more about them than just, one thing at a time. So there's an example here. Someone is moving through the site on the top here, and they appear to be looking at information. This is from a university site that we set up. They're looking at information about the engineering program, and they're looking at information about understanding how much tuition is. So we're giving them points towards they're probably interested in engineering and they're probably a prospective undergrad. And because of that, as they move through, we can start calculating that this person likely is interested in the engineering program and they're probably a prospective undergrad. So perhaps we can start sending them email marketing communications that will help nudge or push them along on their journey to actually applying. Finally, in Sitecore, there are goals, events, and outcomes, which are all major types of conversions and ways that you can track specific actions that users have taken. Sitecore goals, if you're familiar with the Sitecore marketing schema at all, you've definitely heard of goals and engagement values. These are some pretty great ways to track how people are engaging with the things that matter most on your site. So goals are used to track key conversions, downloads, video views if that's really crucial to your business, event registrations, applications, signing up for a membership, these really big ones. Events might be used for, smaller, more, still important, but maybe more interaction type events. So somebody was exposed to certain kind of personalization, or they were participant in an A/B test, but they didn't know it. Or perhaps it's just somebody interacted with facets on a filtered search, and we know what they faceted for, so we can use that data to then personalize their experience elsewhere on the site. Outcomes are another key data point, but they're really used to track the journey of a customer throughout your customer life cycle. So maybe it's somebody started off as a lead, and once they submitted their email address, they're now a qualified lead. So we can set up personalization based on the journey or point in time that your users are on. So that's behavioral data in Sitecore. Moving on, we have attribute data. So these are contextual facts about an anonymous visitor. Attribute data are things like location, which campaign they came from, which website they came from, what is their organization, maybe what's their name and email, probably a business name or email, which we can get using third-party data tools. We can also get their IP address. So attribute data, again, really familiar location-based personalization. We have a client here that is using that quite a bit. They offer a lot of really rich content on their website that can be very region specific. So if somebody came to the website from a specific location, the website would automatically populate and promote content that is relevant to that region alone. So that can be great too. Same thing with campaigns. Campaigns are a great way to set up personalization on your site. If a person is coming from a Facebook ad, you want that ad experience to be consistent on your website. So we would use that data point of which campaign they came from to then personalize on the site. So out of the box, Sitecore doesn't give us a ton for attribute data. It gives us location, but only if you have GeoIP services turned on. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but it is free. You just have to turn it on. It's part of most packages. And then another one is referring campaign. So in order to use referring campaign out of the box with Sitecore, you'd have to take advantage of the Sitecore campaign creator to use campaign codes. And then finally, referring website actually does transfer through without any additional effort required. So here is a view into what the Sitecore experience profile looks like. And I'd love to bring this up because I think it's a great way to show all the different types of data that Sitecore can capture. This is reflective of what's being stored in XDB. So across the top here, we have a key journey milestones timeline, which is where outcomes are presented. This is behavioral data. And then over on the left, we have, I have an arrow pointing to the Salesforce tab, where you can see that it doesn't have to be Salesforce, but this just is in this example, where we have profile data from integrated third-party tools. This could be attribute or explicit data, depending on what the third-party tool is. And then below that, we have interaction data, which again is mostly behavioral data. Here we're able to see that somebody was exposed to personalization events, their last visit, what they've been doing on the site. And then on the bottom left, we have pattern matches. This is that behavioral profiling that I was talking about earlier, identifying patterns of behavior across different sets of axes for behavioral data. And then hopping over to the right, we have an avatar that's blank right now, but if there was an avatar filled in from somewhere, there would be a picture where we have the user profile data, completely explicit data, name, email address, phone number, business name. There's ways to get more details there. Again, you have to wire that up to either Sitecore forms or integrate it with a CRM or third-party data system. And then finally, the last one is connected campaigns. And there are no campaigns here because this particular example, they don't leverage Sitecore Campaign Creator, but many of our clients do, and actually many of our clients leverage campaigns as one of the primary ways to execute on personalization. So that's all of the different types of data, the 3 different types. And once you've got personalization, your attributes or your data points determined, in order to run personalization on Sitecore, you actually have to set up personalization rules, and it's creating a condition. It's very similar to Outlook conditions, Outlook rules. So when the current interactions campaign is this campaign, then show this particular component. So you can see these rules here, these come from the Sitecore Habitat Home demo. So if you have access to that, I highly recommend playing around and clicking around in there. It's got some really awesome personalization and rather complex personalization setup, leveraging campaigns, behavioral profiling, and goals, events, and all of that stuff. So highly recommend it. But just so this is kind of tying together that once you've set up all those data points, you can then create your rules to execute personalization on. And all of this is personalization inside the box. And I'm going to hand it over to Erica, who's going to talk about personalization outside of the box. Give her
Thanks,
control.
Steph.
Yeah, sure.
So for personalizing outside of the box, what I want to talk about, the main message that I have here is that you can personalize on any data that you can access. So Steph just discussed all of the data that you're able to access out of the box with Sitecore, but there are also a number of third-party services that can provide you with additional data that you can't get directly from Sitecore itself. So 2 examples of this are Kickfire and demand-based. There's plenty more, but I'm going to focus on Kickfire specifically, just because I did a project for a client with Kickfire that I thought provided an interesting example of connecting a third-party data service to personalization. So Kickfire is a service that takes a user's IP address and uses that to provide information about the user's company. So that includes their company name and website, category, location, number of employees, and a lot more data as well. The way that Kickfire works technically is that you make an API call to the Kickfire service um, using the user's IP address, and Kickfire will return you a data object with all of that information uh, that it's able to glean based on the user's IP address. One consideration for this is the officially supported way to use Kickfire is to make one API call for the user's first visit and store all of the data that is returned in a cookie or in individual cookies for each data point, which is what I've done. The reason for that being that each API call costs money. So you want to limit the API calls to run as infrequently as possible, ideally only happening on the first ever visit to the site. And then once that data is retrieved, you have it saved and available for the rest of the visit and all future visits until they clear their cookies or use a different browser or device. Once we have that data stored in our cookies, I'm able to personalize on any of those different cookies using one flexible rule that I'm going to show you a little later. But first, I want to talk about one consideration for personalizing on cookies is that if you're going to personalize on a cookie, the cookie has to exist before personalization occurs in the Sitecore pipeline because personalization happens on the back end on the server side. And in many cases, cookies are generated via JavaScript, which is on the client side, which means that all of the server side operations have already completed and the page has been displayed to the user, and then the JavaScript runs, which creates and saves the cookies. The problem with that is that if you're trying to display personalized content based on one of those cookies, the first time the user hits that page, that cookie doesn't exist yet, so they're going to see the non-personalized default content. Then if they were to refresh the page or visit it again, they would see the personalized content. Or if they were to come to that page the first time from a different location in the site, once the cookies have already been set, they'll see the personalized content. So not only could that be a little bit confusing for the user, but you also miss out on your intended goal of giving them that personalized content if they're not seeing it the first time they hit the page. So there are two ways that you can handle this, and it depends on how your cookies are being created, if they're being created server side or client side. I recommend creating on the server side if you can, because it's cleaner and I think less prone to error. And the main takeaway for generating your cookies on the server side is that you just need to make sure that it happens before personalization occurs in the pipeline. Meaning you would have to have some processor that you patch into the Sitecore pipeline prior to when personalization occurs. Now, the only issue with server-side requests, specifically for Kickfire, because Kickfire is using the client's IP address, I discovered an issue where we were making the API call to Kickfire on the server side on my local and testing environments, and that worked fine. But then when we got to production, it turned out that it wasn't returning the user's actual IP address because we were on Azure CDN. And with the CDN setup, it was masking the user's IP address and just returning the IP address of the server itself. So there are a couple ways that you can handle this. Typically, if you enable either true client IP or X-forwarded for headers in your CDN, that will expose the user's true IP address, and that should be all you need to use the actual IP. In our particular instance, exposing the true client IP header would have required upgrading our CDN, which was just not feasible at the time due to cost limitations, which is why I went ahead with the secondary method, which was to generate cookies on the client side via JavaScript. And so with that scenario, the method that I came up with to make sure that users would always see the personalized content was to hide all of the page content on the first load if the cookies were not already set, and then show the content once the cookies were generated and saved. And sorry, not show, but reload the page once the cookies were generated. So basically, if the cookies don't exist, the page is blank. If the cookies do exist, the content shows. And so even though the user is technically seeing the cookies on the second page load, to them, they actually think they're on the first page load. So it's a bit of a tricky method, but it accomplishes the goal of only ever showing the user the personalized content once the cookies have already been created. And one other small consideration for this method was that I also had to make sure to show the content as well if the cookies could not be generated, like if the API call failed, because otherwise you just want to have error handling so that you make sure that you don't have a situation where the page is just blank forever. So here is the actual personalization rule. It's really a super simple rule. If you look at the picture on the right, that is the condition item in Sitecore. And you can see that the condition is where the cookie name property is equal to a cookie value property. So you recall the screenshot of the cookies that I showed in the earlier slide. Each of my Kickfire cookies had a unique name. Um, so, um, so in this case, I can create a personalization rule where if a specific cookie has a specific value, show particular content. And with that, we can also do if the value is not equal to, or if the value contains. Um, and so using that rule, we can say if the value of the website name cookie contains a particular competitor's name or a partner's name, we're going to show them specific content. A bit more on that. Um, Here is a picture of a actual like personalized component in Sitecore, and um, in this example here, I'm hiding a piece of content from a competitor using the company website name example that I just provided. So if the company website name is evilcompetitor.com, we're going to hide this block. So we could also personalize content based on the company category. If the category returns as telecom, manufacturing, digital strategy, you can show specific content. You could personalize content based on size or revenue. And you can also target content based on specific users, such as using the company name or website, like I just discussed previously, for preferred clients, potential clients, partners, or competitors. So if you're familiar with cookies, you may have been wondering about GDPR concerns. If you're not familiar, GDPR is a international law regarding what personal information cannot be stored in cookies, and basically users have to be provided with the full knowledge and given informed consent for sites to be able to track personal information in cookies, and they also have to have the option to opt out of having their cookies saved. So for most of the data examples that I provided, most of that would probably not be considered personally identifiable information, or PII. But anytime you're going to be storing third-party information in a cookie, I recommend checking with your legal team to make sure whether what you're storing is PII. Some data on its own might not be PII, like a first name, just the name Erica would not allow anyone to identify who I am, because there's a million Ericas in the world. But if you had other information as well, like my company name, Valier, that might start to allow someone to track down who I actually am, and that might start to fall under GDPR law. So as I said, it really just depends on what the data is, and I recommend consulting with your legal team. But there are alternatives if GDPR is a concern and you are unable to store this data in a cookie. There are some alternative solutions. So first of all, you can store your data in session state instead of cookies. Session state is fine, as far as I'm aware, under GDPR, because it doesn't persist across sessions. And you could just modify that rule that I showed a few slides back to pull the data from the session data rather than cookies. So it functions fundamentally the same. You're just storing and retrieving the data in a slightly different way. Another option is if you are using XDB, you can store your data in XDB contact facets instead of cookies, and then retrieve your data from those contact facets. One thing that I thought was cool about the Kickfire personalization implementation is that it does not depend on XDB. The website that I did this on did not have XDB enabled. And XDB provides you a ton of additional power and is a great thing to have, but not everybody has it. So the fact that you can do all this personalization without XDB is really beneficial. But if you do have XDB enabled, integrating your third-party data with XDB can give you a lot of additional benefits. So first of all, as I mentioned, you can store your data in XDB rather than cookies, which completely avoids all GDPR concerns, but also potentially reduces the number of API calls that you have to make to Kickfire, which would also um, it also provides you a lot more capabilities with analytics, so that you can get analytics data on the effectiveness of your personalized content, which is, um, sorry, just by having that data included in XDB, it is exposing that data to the rest of the XDB ecosystem as well, and it. And
Yeah, I
yes,
can
Steph, back
jump
to
in
you.
here. Sure, yeah. Like Erica was saying, you don't have to have XDB to use it, but putting it in XDB, putting this data, storing it down in XDB allows you to leverage all of the other Sitecore marketing tools within the Sitecore marketing ecosystem. There are a bunch of them. But for example, if you were to do this, you would be able to leverage that experience profile, which I had shown before and is also in the background of this screen. You can also leverage marketing automation based on this data. So for example, if marketing automation is a really neat Sitecore tool that is a drag and drop tool that allows you to set conditions, listen for certain behaviors, and change attributes about a user based on their behavior or time. So what you can do is if a visitor is coming from an organization that has 50 to 100 employees, for example, you could set them on a marketing automation campaign where they, get flagged with a small business, and any information from a personalization standpoint might start displaying to them and their web experience for small businesses. So there's a lot of different tools you can use. Also, when you're doing the personalization based on just the cookies, the data analytics available in Sitecore are not as readily available. One way we've gotten around that is to integrate with Google Analytics and to push some information into the data layer about which components were displayed on a page so that Google Analytics allows you to see that data there. So that's all we have for our presentation on getting more with Sitecore personalization and integrating with third-party systems. Thank you very much. And Dan, hand it back to you.
Hi, thank you. That was very informative. I'd say I'm not seeing any questions yet in the chat window. So just to get things kind of warmed up, Steph, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about if, let's say, a client wants to get, or a customer, I should say, a Sitecore user wants to get started with personalization, really doesn't know how to get their feet wet with it. What should they be thinking about?
Sure, yeah. So just going back to the earlier point about starting with the data that you have available to you, thinking through attribute data, explicit data, or behavioral data. I think behavioral data is a really great place to start. If you just want to try personalization out, I would recommend replacing one of your components with a personalization rule that says, if this is the first time a user is visiting, show them this slightly different message. I think that's a really easy place to get started. Sitecore has a ton of really informative materials on, there's a white paper on 10 personalization tactics that you can use. And a lot of people talk about crawl, walk, run personalization efforts. So I definitely recommend looking into that.
Awesome, thanks. And Erica, I've got a question for you. So the customer that you built that Kickfire integration for, are they self-sufficient with that, or do they really come to developers in order to actually implement a rule? Or has it gotten to the point where the authors think, gee, I want to personalize this to only people who see this, who are in this industry vertical, for example?
Yeah. So that was pretty easy for them to become self-sufficient with, because as I mentioned, we just had one single rule that was reusable for any different cookie. So once they like got the hang of understanding that they just needed to fill in cookie name, which they did need to get from me because I was using like hard-coded rules to generate the cookie. So the cookie names were hard-coded. So I would have to provide that information to them with what the actual cookie name values were. But once they had the cookie names, they could just like interchangeably use whatever cookie name they wanted and then whatever value they were expecting. And because it was just one single rule, it was pretty easy to work with.
That's great. Is there anything you can share without giving away any client secrets, like anecdotal stories about how they've been able to use this to like create, you know, either more relevant or you know, any success stories
Sure.
you can share?
Well, one thing that they were talking about wanting to do that they haven't actually done yet, but they were interested in using personalization um, to change like the suggested products, which they could do based on the company revenue, for example. So showing like the more powerful, more expensive products to companies that had a really high revenue, but really small companies suggesting like the smaller starter products that might be more in their budget. Another thing that I did briefly mention was the whole hiding content rule from competitors, because I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was really funny and kind of sneaky. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it was amusing to me because I had never seen anything like that before. But what they wanted to do was basically just like hide content from users that had known competitor like website names. Um, and then this didn't actually use personalization itself, but we put a redirect rule in place to redirect them to the careers page from any other page on the site if they were a competitor.
Oh, that's
So there
excellent.
were some limitations to this, of course, because it's based on IP. The personalization and redirects based on competitor name and email address would only work as long as they were on their company's network. So if they were at home and they wanted to go to the website and browse, because Kickfire wouldn't return that they were on their company's network, it just wouldn't really have any data about them. And so they would still be able to see the normal, non-hidden, non-redirected content. But it certainly would make it a little more tricky if they were trying to browse my client's website while they were at work, which is probably what they would be doing, assuming that they don't just spend all of their free time at home browsing their company's competitors' websites for
Great.
business purposes.
That's a great story. So just a final request. I don't see any questions in the chat. Oh, just got one. So I'll get to that in just a second. Let's see. The one point I wanted to make. So I believe you mentioned, Erica, that GDPR is not a consideration for information stored server side. And I'm not an expert, but I don't think that's the case, just because I know that Sitecore added a right to be forgotten API to the contact facet system, so that you can mark information you store in Sitecore as being personally sensitive. And then if you execute that API, it'll clear that data. So just a data point that I think it is also a consideration, even, you know, regardless of where the data is stored. But again, I'm neither an attorney nor an expert in GDPR, but it's just what I've been able to glean from Sitecore documentation.
Yeah,
So I
I'm
have
not an expert either, and that's why my advice always falls back on to consult your legal team.
excellent advice. Okay, so I have some questions coming in. So let's start with Andy Perry. Could you please bring up that matrix from earlier in the deck of out-of-the-box data for personalization? Would like to grab a screenshot of it.
Sure thing. So this actually isn't all out-of-the-box data necessarily. Some of it does require an integration. Would say a good handful of these, though, are available out of the box.
Got your screenshot, Andy?
You're welcome.
Okay, so the next question is from Chris Brady. And he asked, did we share that Google no longer provides network domain of visitors, tools like Kickfire being adopted at a higher rate? So yeah, I don't, can either speak to you how like changes in Google's behavior is affecting this space?
Sure, yeah. No, Chris, we didn't necessarily touch on that, but I will say that Google taking that away, so the taking away the network domain we have seen personally at Valier a huge spike in our clients being interested in tools like Kickfire. Another popular tool for this is Demandbase, who also offers IP-based lookups. I don't know if we can let Chris chime in. I'm sure he probably has some commentary there.
Yeah, Chris, would you like to join in the call?
Unmute him.
Just let me unmute him. Yes.
Hello, am I there?
You're here.
You are there, Chris.
Oh, hey. No, actually didn't have anything to add. That was perfect.
Great.
Okay, great.
The only thing I would say is that pricing ramps is associated with the number of sessions. So if you're thinking about using these tools on your website, oftentimes it's tied to the volume of traffic or sessions. And if you have the ability, if you're interested, of just firing the pixels only on pages of interest, so like if you want to do it in a certain product section or so on, that's something you can just do with your front-end developer. So there's lots of flexibility, but pricing does scale with visit traffic.
Great point. Thanks, Chris. And so also have a question from our colleague, Nicole Durant. There was a mention that you don't need XDB turned on for personalization of data outside of Sitecore. Do you know if you still need an XM installation? And I think you mean XP? Or can you, let's just speak to the XP versus XM. Do you need an XP installation even with XDB disabled in order to use these rules? So just, I got a little tied up there. The question is, even if you don't have XDB, do you need to have XP?
So maybe you can answer that, Dan, because I'm actually not sure what is required for personalization to work to begin with. I just know from this particular example here that you obviously don't need XDB, and for these rules based on cookies, XDB is not required. But do you know if XP is required for it to work to begin with, Dan?
I have anecdotal information. I haven't dug in deeply, but my understanding, our colleague Yaya is working on a blog post on this because he actually got this set up, that this has changed. Back in the old days, Sitecore used to promote the fact that you don't need to have, back when it was called DMS, you didn't need to have DMS in order to do in-session personalization. And so you could do things in memory. But at some point in the 9 era, I don't know exactly when, they changed that so that you do need to have an XP license and XP installation in order to have that personalization rules engine work. So there's a different, there's different DLLs involved, and there's also a different license involved. So yeah, you won't be able to set up, my understanding is you won't be able to set up that just with like the classic kind of trimmed down XM installation. Now on the other side of that, I've seen discussion in the release notes that XM is more performant now, or at least is not paying the performance cost of having all this XDB supporting code in place if you're not using it. So there's perhaps a technical trade-off there. And we do have a blog post coming out, at least it's in our pipeline, to discuss exactly what's involved with that technically. Okay, I don't see any other point. I see Corey confirms that's his understanding as well, as far as XP versus XM. and that they have updated their documentation on that. And Chris has a note that tools like Kickfire do not offer 100% correct detection. The best tools in this space are typically 50 to 60% accurate, I believe. So that's Chris's
Yes,
experience. Yep.
I've seen that as well. Actually, in testing it myself, Kickfire, I don't believe in my experience actually returned Valier from my IP address at work. It returned something else. It was like telecom services.
Got it.
So it is a great tool, but it's not perfect.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Well, I'm going to, let's see.
Hey, Dan, this is Steph.
Yes.
Before
Yes,
we
please.
sign off, I wanted to, it looks like Andy has already signed off, but I wanted to provide an updated screen grab for any of those who were interested. So
Okay.
everything here in blue is available out of the box. I added just a small note that says what might be required in order to take advantage of it. Member status, industry, AMS profile info, or missing AMS profile info, those all require an integration with some other system. So everything in blue here, pretty much out of the box, ready to go with Sitecore.
Fantastic. And well, we will be releasing this as a video sometime next week. And if any friends of Andy are on the call, then let them know to look for this final slide. We have a complaint that virtual pizza is not cutting it. So we're hoping that if we can get this COVID situation under control and flatten that curve, everyone washes their hands, then we'll be able to have a meetup in the hopefully not too distant future back on Elm Street in Davis Square, and we will be serving both pizza and beer. In the meantime, thank you very much, and yeah, keep Sitecoring on.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.